When we think of queens, we imagine beauty, elegance, crowns gleaming under candlelight. But that image is a lie. Behind the silk curtains of medieval palaces, there was filth, literal filth. Queens who didn't bathe for months. Royal chambers that reeked of blood, sweat, and rot. Women who poisoned rivals with their own cosmetics. And queens who fed on cruelty as easily as they fed on honeyed wine. They were not the graceful icons your schoolbooks promised you, they were survivors in a world of dirt, disease, and deceit. Their beauty hid boils, their perfumes masked decay, and their crowns rested on skulls still warm from betrayal. You think modern gossip is vile? Try a medieval court, where every whisper could kill you, and every queen learned to lie with a smile. This is the story of the queen's history tried to polish, but no amount of gold can hide the stench of their truth. Most people won't make it through this story. They'll flinch, they'll scroll away, just like the nobles who turned their noses up while their castles rotted from within. But you're still here. That means you can handle the truth most people are too soft to face. So prove it, hit subscribe. If not, go ahead and click away like the cowards who bowed to the crown and pretended not to see the dirt beneath it. The word queen once meant divinity, chosen by God, crowned by destiny. But in the Middle Ages, it meant something far less divine. It meant survival in a world where filth was as constant as prayer, and where the sweet scent of perfume was nothing but a mask for decay. Behind every castle wall, there were smells, rancid meat, chamber pots spilling into corridors, and the stench of fear itself. A queen's gown, heavy with velvet and gold, was never truly clean. It absorbed the smoke from torches, the sweat of 1,000 courtiers, and the staleness of rooms that hadn't seen fresh air in months. Imagine it, banquets that lasted all night, meat rotting under candle heat, dogs gnawing on bones beneath the tables as nobles wiped their greasy hands on their tunics. And above them all, on her dais, the queen, smiling, radiant, her teeth polished with ground coral and urine. That was refinement, once upon a time. Eleanor of Aquitaine, a name sung by poets, painted by history as a goddess of culture and grace. But step into her court and you'd see the truth, perfumed halls crawling with lice, musicians strumming beside cesspools, lovers whispering in corners rank with sweat and spilled wine. She ruled 2 kingdoms, France and England, yet her world was a theater of filth. Her letters spoke of honor and courtly love, but her body bore the marks of travel, childbirth, infection, and exhaustion. She was queen, mother, diplomat, and prisoner. And through it all, she remained beautiful, because she had to. In a world ruled by men, her beauty was her sword. Her perfume, her armor. Queens were not just rulers, they were symbols of purity. Yet behind every saintly image was rot. Beneath every gold-embroidered veil, their scalps bled from lice bites. Beneath every jeweled ring, dirt crusted from days of unwashed hands. And beneath every forced smile, a quiet scream. Take Margaret of Anjou, fierce, ambitious, the so-called she-wolf of France. Chronicles say she terrified men twice her size. But they never wrote of how she smelled. The battlefield stank of blood and horse dung, and Margaret rode through it in silk and steel, her hands blistered, her hair stiff with dust and sweat. When she returned to her tent, her ladies-in-waiting didn't wash her, they doused her in rosewater, layer after layer, until she reeked of flowers and iron. She didn't care. The perfume wasn't for beauty, it was for power. Power smelled sweet, even if the woman behind it didn't. Royal baths were rare luxuries not because of time, but because of fear. Many believed that bathing opened the pores to disease, that water itself carried sin. So queens bathed perhaps once a month, some once a season. Instead, they powdered themselves crushed iris root, lavender, and even ground pearls to hide the odor. But nothing could hide the truth forever. The closer you came to royalty, the more you smelled the price of their throne. And then there were the rituals, morning prayers, endless feasts, confessions whispered in chapels filled with incense so thick it choked the lungs. The candles dripped wax like tears. The marble floors were cold under bare feet. And above it all, the cross gleaming, silent, unblinking. It watched queens pray for forgiveness while their servants scrubbed blood from the sheets after a miscarriage or assassination. The church called them divine. But divinity stank of death. Catherine de' Medici, the Italian Queen of France. Refined, educated, the mother of kings, and the master of poisons. Her court glimmered with silks and mirrors, yet behind every door, someone was dying. Historians say she carried sachets of sweet herbs beneath her sleeves to mask the odor of her decaying teeth. Her perfumes were so potent, they burned the skin of those who touched her. And when her rivals fell ill, the same scent lingered on their pillows. Coincidence? History will never say. But Catherine knew in a world that stank of power, poison was just another perfume. What made these queens so disgusting wasn't just the filth that surrounded them. It was the hypocrisy, the illusion of grace in a world of decay. They smiled as they buried their enemies. They sang hymns as they spread lies. They spoke of virtue while standing knee-deep in corruption, both moral and physical. Theirs was a world where beauty was not born from cleanliness, but from control. Control over image. Over perception. Over truth. But perhaps the most haunting part is this: they didn't know they were filthy. The stench was normal. The lice were routine. They believed themselves divine, untouchable, chosen by God Himself. Yet the smell of their courts carried for miles. In winter, when the fires burned low, peasants could tell when the queen's procession was coming, not by sight, but by scent. The air would thicken with perfume, sweat, and decay. The smell of holiness and rot, hand in hand. And yet, we must remember this: these women were not monsters. They were survivors in a nightmare world. A queen could not afford to be clean. She could not afford weakness. To show softness was to invite death. Every smile, every gown, every gesture was a mask, painted with powder and blood. They learned to rule through illusion, because illusion was all they had. The poets wrote of their beauty. The priests blessed their souls. But the truth lies beneath the crown, in the filth that history tried to wash away. And no matter how many centuries pass, the stench of their world still lingers, if you dare to breathe it in. Power never comes clean. In the medieval world, it came soaked in blood, whispered through confessions, and sealed with kisses that could kill. The queens of Europe did not rule through purity, they ruled through fear, desire, and deceit. Behind every crown was a corpse. Behind every smile, a secret. Eleanor of Aquitaine knew this better than anyone. Twice a queen, first of France, then of England, she walked the thin line between throne and death. When her marriage to Louis VII collapsed, she didn't fade quietly into a convent. She remarried to Henry Plantagenet, the man who would become King Henry II of England. It was a dangerous love, passionate, political, and drenched in betrayal. Henry was a man of fury. He took mistresses, mocked his wife, and treated her crown as his property. But Eleanor was no docile queen. She gathered allies, whispered in the shadows, and when her own sons rebelled against their father, Eleanor stood with them. A mother turned conspirator. And when the rebellion failed, Henry locked her away, a queen imprisoned for 15 years. In her cell, the air was cold and damp. The perfume that once masked her sweat had faded, and rats gnawed at the straw beneath her bed. Yet she never broke. When Henry died, she returned, older, harder, and far more dangerous. The woman they called beautiful had become something else entirely, a survivor carved from iron and memory. In every century, there was a queen like her, a woman who learned that in a world ruled by men, survival meant becoming more monstrous than the monsters who ruled you. Margaret of Anjou. Her name struck terror into hearts across England. The Wars of the Roses tore her kingdom apart, brother against brother, noble against noble, and at its heart stood a queen determined to keep her crown. She led armies, rode into battle, watched her enemies die screaming in the mud. And when her husband, poor, broken Henry VI, descended into madness, Margaret ruled in his name. They called her witch, serpent, harlot. But the truth was simpler, she was a woman who refused to be powerless. When her son was slain in cold blood, legends say Margaret didn't weep. She stared at his body in silence, her face blank as stone. Because she knew tears wouldn't bring him back, and weakness would only invite another knife. That night, she washed her hands in rosewater, put on her gown, and returned to court. The fragrance of roses followed her, masking the scent of her grief. She was a queen. And queens did not mourn. They endured. Catherine de' Medici, another serpent in silk. The widow queen of France, mother to 3 kings, and the quiet architect of terror. She watched her children inherit thrones, only to die one by one, poisoned, diseased, betrayed. But Catherine remained. They called her the Black Queen, and perhaps they were right. Her gowns were black velvet, her heart blacker still. In her court, banquets turned into funerals. A smile from Catherine could mean favor, or death. It was said she never ate without testing her food first. That she carried small vials of antidote hidden in her sleeves. That her gloves were soaked in arsenic to kill by touch. The same hands that blessed her sons' crowns had already written their obituaries. When the bells of Paris rang for the St. Bartholomew's Day massacre, the streets ran red with Protestant blood. And though history still debates her guilt, one truth remains: no queen in Europe's history ever smelled sweeter while surrounded by so much death. But beneath every act of cruelty, there was fear. Fear of irrelevance. Fear of growing old. Fear of being replaced by another woman with a younger smile and a fresher scent. The queens of medieval Europe lived in a cage made of velvet and gold, and every breath they took was borrowed. Behind their jewels and veils, they were haunted, not by ghosts, but by time. Aging was their true enemy. The moment a queen's skin lost its glow, the court began to whisper. When her beauty faded, her power did too. And so they hid it, with lead powder that ate into their skin, with mercury that hollowed their bones. They painted their deaths onto their faces, one layer at a time, until even the mirror became their enemy. But filth does not only cling to the body, it clings to the soul. The deeper you look into the lives of these women, the clearer it becomes. The disgust was not in their unwashed hair or their rotting teeth. It was in the lies they were forced to live. To be born a queen was to be born in a cage. A prison perfumed with roses and blood. History remembers their beauty. It remembers their crowns, their jewels, their portraits painted by trembling hands. But the smell of their world, that, history tried to forget. The scent of sweat and power. The sweetness of poison and fear. The iron tang of betrayal that hung in every royal bedchamber. That smell was the truth. And it clung to them long after death. In the end, all queens bled the same. Beneath the gold, beneath the legend, they were women, scarred, frightened, desperate to matter in a world that would never let them be human. They fought not just for power, but for survival. And every cruel act, every whispered betrayal, every drop of poison in a chalice, it was never about greed. It was about staying alive one more night. And maybe that's the most disgusting truth of all. That survival in a rotten world requires you to become rotten too. In the Middle Ages, a queen's body was never her own. It was a bargaining chip. A treaty written in flesh. A vessel of dynasties, wars, and alliances. But when the world saw them as trophies, these women learned to turn the game upside down. They learned to weaponize the very thing meant to cage them, their beauty, their charm, their presence. Every glance was strategy. Every touch, a calculated move. The way a queen smiled across a feast table could mean the difference between peace and execution. One word whispered in the right ear could bring down an empire. And one moment of silence could save a life. They called it temptation. But for the queens of medieval Europe, temptation was a tool, sharper than any sword. A man could ride into battle with armor and steel. A woman had only her wit, her words, and the illusion of grace. And if that illusion cracked, her crown would crumble. To be beautiful was dangerous. To be desired was deadly. But to be ignored, that was fatal. Take Anne Boleyn, centuries ahead of her time. A woman who understood that power begins where obedience ends. She wasn't born royal, she became it. When she caught the eye of Henry VIII, she refused him not out of virtue, but out of vision. Each rejection made him hungrier. Each smile, a promise without fulfillment. She didn't seduce the king with her body, she seduced him with denial. And for a brief, shining moment, it worked. But the same weapon that raised her would destroy her. When her womb failed to deliver a son, her beauty turned to curse. The court that once bowed to her now whispered that she bewitched the king. Within months, she was imprisoned, accused of treason, adultery, and worse. On the morning of her death, she dressed carefully, a crimson gown, her hair tucked beneath a cap, her face calm. The blade that ended her reign was said to be so sharp she barely had time to blink. They buried her without ceremony. The queen who had mastered seduction left the world in silence. But Anne's story was not unique, it was the pattern of queenship itself. Their bodies were temples of hypocrisy. The church demanded chastity, the crown demanded heirs. Their husbands demanded obedience, their enemies demanded their downfall. They were trapped in contradictions, saint and sinner, virgin and mother, angel and serpent. And so they learned to walk the line. They learned to speak softly and strike silently. To smile while scheming. To obey in public and command in private. Isabella of Castile, remembered as a saintly ruler, the mother of Spain, the woman who financed Columbus's voyage across the sea. But even she played the game. Her marriage to Ferdinand was one of love, yes, but also of strategy. Two thrones united under one bed. Together they reshaped the world, yet Isabella always knew how fragile her power truly was. She endured whispers of her husband's affairs, smiled at banquets where traitors feasted, and prayed beneath ceilings painted with angels that watched her sin in silence. Her faith was her armor, her motherhood her justification, her purity her weapon. But when the crown weighed heavy, even the most holy hands were stained. Under her reign, Spain's Inquisition began, a cleansing born of devotion and fear. Isabella believed she was purifying her kingdom. But the truth is simpler, she was fighting to control a world that refused to let her rule cleanly. Because in a filthy age, even faith could not stay pure. The body was the battlefield. The mind was the weapon. And for every queen who survived, there were 10 who were destroyed by rumor alone. A whisper in a corridor. A glance too long. A servant's confession twisted by envy. That was all it took to turn holiness into heresy. The most dangerous words in a medieval court were not curses, they were compliments. Because every compliment carried suspicion. Every act of admiration could become evidence. To be loved was to be watched. To be adored was to be judged. And the moment love turned to fear, death was never far behind. History remembers queens as symbols of grace and beauty. But the truth is far more painful. These were women forced to become creatures of strategy, their lives scripted by others, their choices bound by the expectations of men who would never bleed as they did. They smiled while dying inside. They bore children who became enemies. They kissed the hands that held their chains. And still, they ruled. They ruled through the only thing they could control, perception. Their every breath became performance. Their every movement, a message. They were actresses on the grandest stage of all, the theater of survival. It's easy to judge them now. To call them manipulative. To call them cruel. But what would you have done, if your worth was measured by the purity of your skin, the softness of your voice, the obedience of your heart? Could you have stayed clean in a world that punished you for existing? Could you have survived at all? Maybe that's what makes them so unforgettable. Not their beauty. Not their sins. But their endurance. Their refusal to break, even when their crowns rotted, their faces blistered with poison, and their names were dragged through the filth of history. And so, when you hear the word queen, remember this. The most powerful women in history were not born to rule, they were forced to fight for the right to exist. And the most disgusting thing about them was how far they had to go just to be remembered. Power has a scent. Sweet at first, like roses left too long in the sun. But wait long enough, and it rots. It clings to the air, thick and suffocating, like perfume hiding decay. Every queen who has ruled long enough learns this smell. The scent of dying trust. The odor of fear. In the beginning, they fight to rise. But the higher they climb, the more they begin to tremble. Because the throne is not a seat, it's a cage lined with gold. Every friend becomes a spy. Every whisper becomes a threat. And every smile hides a dagger. Catherine de Medici, the Black Queen of France. Born among bankers, raised among poison. Her enemies mocked her for her foreign blood, for her barren years, for her witch-like eyes. So she learned to listen. To watch. To wait. And when France became a nest of vipers, she didn't scream. She simply learned to hiss louder. They say her gloves were scented to mask the smell of death, that her perfumes hid venom and her rings concealed toxins. Maybe it's myth. Maybe not. But in the court of Valois, rumor itself was a weapon. And Catherine wielded it like a queen. When her husband died, she ruled through her sons, 3 fragile kings bound by her will. And though she smiled in public, the walls of her palace reeked of paranoia. Dinners ended with sudden sickness. Courtiers vanished without reason. And every toast might have been a farewell. But power does not stay loyal. It devours even those who feed it. Catherine's eyes grew darker. Her hands trembled. Her advisors whispered that she talked to ghosts. Perhaps she did, the ghosts of those she outlived, those she silenced, those whose blood she ordered spilled to keep her crown afloat. By the end, she no longer ruled France, she ruled her fears. A kingdom built on whispers, shadows, and the scent of poisoned roses. And she was not alone in her descent. Across England, another queen fought her own madness, not born of poison, but of isolation. Elizabeth Tudor, daughter of Anne Boleyn, heir of blood and betrayal. The Virgin Queen, they called her. But no woman who rules alone for 45 years remains untouched by ghosts. Elizabeth trusted no one. She slept with a sword by her bed and mirrors covered by cloth. In her later years, she wore thick white paint to hide her wrinkles, lead-based powder that slowly ate away her flesh. Her beauty became a mask of death. Her crown, a curse of loneliness. Each morning, she stared into the mirror, not to admire herself, but to convince herself she was still there. Still alive. Still in control. Her laughter grew sharp, her punishments swift, her paranoia endless. Because she had learned, the moment she appeared weak, the world would feast on her bones. Power isolates. It demands worship, but gives nothing in return. It promises legacy, but steals peace. And the queens who once commanded nations end up whispering to shadows, clutching jewels that no longer shine, waiting for footsteps that never come. Their palaces rot from within. Their mirrors crack. Their crowns grow heavier by the hour. Until one morning, the silence breaks them. History tells us their victories. But listen closer, and you'll hear the sound of their unraveling. The soft click of a lock turning on the inside of their minds. The trembling breath of a woman who can no longer tell which of her friends is still alive. The rustle of parchment carrying death warrants signed by hands that no longer feel human. They became their own prisons. They stared out of windows that once opened to cheers, and saw only vultures circling over a decaying throne. They ruled a kingdom of ghosts. But even in madness, there was clarity. A cruel, quiet truth that only the broken can see. Power does not belong to those who win it, it belongs to those who survive it. And survival demands sacrifice. Of love. Of trust. Of sanity. These queens gave everything. Their bodies. Their faith. Their joy. Until nothing remained but the throne itself, and even that turned to dust. So when we glorify crowns, when we dream of thrones, remember this. The price of power is the slow death of peace. The higher you rise, the lonelier it gets. And when you reach the top, there's no one left to save you, not even yourself. The torches are out. The halls are empty. The crowns lie in their glass cases, collecting dust. History says it's over. But I don't think it ever ended. Every age has its queens. Some wear diamonds. Some wear smiles. Some wear exhaustion like armor. And every one of them, whether born in a palace or behind a screen, still fights the same invisible war. The war to be seen as human. We call medieval queens disgusting because they remind us of what we still are. Hungry for control. Terrified of loneliness. Obsessed with beauty, youth, and the illusion of power. We scrub our faces with gold, poison ourselves with perfection. And call it progress. But the mirror doesn't lie. It never has. The faces staring back at us are just reflections of those who came before. Painted over, filtered, polished. But just as desperate to be remembered. Elizabeth hid her decay under white paint. We hide ours under filters. Catherine ruled her world through fear. We rule ours through validation. Isabella burned her enemies alive. We burn ours with words. The poison has changed. But the sickness remains. Maybe that's why their stories still grip us. Because somewhere, deep in the marrow of time, their ghosts still walk beside us. They whisper from their portraits. They watch from their ruined castles. They ask one question, the same one that haunted them in life. Was it worth it? Was the power worth the pain? The crown worth the blood? The throne worth the loneliness? And the truth, whispered through the centuries, is this. No one wins. Not really. The crown always takes more than it gives. It devours beauty. It drinks love. It feeds on time. And when it's done, it leaves behind only a legend. And a grave. But even legends can rot. Their gold fades. Their marble cracks. And one day, some stranger will walk by their tombs. Read their names carved in Latin. And feel, nothing. Just another name. Just another story. Unless someone remembers. Unless someone listens. Unless someone, like you, refuses to look away. Because history doesn't belong to kings. It belongs to those who keep their memory alive. And tonight, you've done just that. You've walked with ghosts. You've seen the filth, the fear, the fragile hearts beneath the crowns. And you've understood the truth. Power doesn't corrupt. It reveals. So the next time you see a portrait of a medieval queen, don't just admire her jewels. Look into her eyes. Behind the paint, behind the posture. You'll see the same thing she saw every day of her reign. A world that loved her crown. But never her. And if you can still look back into those eyes without flinching, then maybe you understand what history tried to hide. The medieval queens were not disgusting. The world around them was. And we are its descendants. Their time has passed. But their lessons remain. Power without mercy is rot. Beauty without truth is death. And history without honesty is just another lie.